Hi, everyone. My name is Parker Haynes. I'm the pastor of St. Timothy United Methodist Church in Brevard, North Carolina. And today I'm joined by my grandfather, the Reverend Dr. Don Haynes, who's been in Methodist clergy in the Western North Carolina Conference for many years. And we're here today to hear a little bit about his perspective, both on what's happening right now in the world with the coronavirus pandemic, and also he's also a very well-respected Methodist historian and theologian, knows a lot about John Wesley, and so I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit too. But Don, just give us a little bit of introduction about yourself. You were born in Rockingham County, and you were a lifelong Methodist and went to High Point College, Duke Divinity School for Seminary. Fill out some of those details for everyone watching.
Well, I was reared in a very, very small country Methodist church on a 5-point circuit, and was always a devout Methodist. My 2 uncles were Methodist ministers. We didn't have any books in our house, but a Methodist discipline was one of them. And so I really grew up on a lot of the sayings of Wesley. Cleanliness is next to godliness was one of them. And don't proselyte people. We are Arminians. We don't believe in predestination. We believe in free will choices and some of their consequences. So a lot of Methodism was kind of built into my childhood nurture. And as you say, I went to a Methodist school, High Point College, when it only had 600 students, and that has 5,500 if they all come back next fall. And then I went to Duke Divinity School. I really became a pastor at 19, served until I was 64, and then served as a student pastor when I was at Duke. So from 1954 to 99, when I retired, I was either a pastor or in some connectional jobs. I was really a pastor for 34 years. I was 4 years director of Western North Carolina Conference Ministries. I was district superintendent of the Charlotte District. I was vice president of St. Paul's School of Theology, a United Methodist Seminary in Kansas City. So I had a kind of a diverse career. However, I majored in history. My avocation has been history, and certainly Methodist history has been a long time reading project of mine. For 16 years after I retired, from 1999 to 2016, I was director of United Methodist Studies. No, I take that back. Methodist Studies, because I had AME Zion, CME people, as well as United Methodist. So I was director of Methodist Studies at Hood Theological Seminary in Salisbury, North Carolina, which is the only African Methodist Episcopal seminary in North America. So I've had a diverse career. Married in 1956. Joan is still with me, though she is under hospice care now, and my life has changed a lot with that. I have 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and one of them is you, and the only great-grandchildren I have are Wesley and Luke, who are your sons. All the grandchildren are doing well, and we have a wonderful family life. So that's who I am. I live in Asheboro, North Carolina. I'm Minister Emeritus at First United Methodist Church in Asheboro, which I served in the 70s. I'm also Minister Emeritus of the New Salem United Methodist Church in Statesville, which I served from 1962 to 66. And I'll still go back to churches. Some Methodist ministers don't do that, but I do. I got a call last week that a 77-year-old woman who has been retarded since birth and was in my first church from 1954 to 58 died last week. And a great aunt who had taken care of her called and said, Judy always said that you paid more attention to her than anyone else ever did, even though she was a teenager, and she wanted you to have her funeral. So when the pandemic is over and we can have a funeral, I have three now that are backed up. One of us a cousin, two are former members. So in a way, you never cease being a minister. As General MacArthur said of military people, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. Preachers are the same way. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you, and we'll go where you want us to go.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I think it's interesting to hear your perspective in all of this is because you were born right around the end of the Great Depression, and you lived through World War II.
Correct.
And then in your pastoral ministry, you were in ministry during the civil rights movement and
Polio epidemic first.
the what? The polio?
Polio epidemic was severe in the 40s and 50s. Yep. And then the civil rights movement.
Yeah. So, and just you've experienced an incredible amount of significant historical events throughout your life and your ministry. So I just think it would be really interesting to hear what has this been like for you, and how is it similar or different to all of those things that you've experienced in your lifetime?
Well, I was born in the Depression, and it wasn't over at our house. Times were very, very hard. My dad lost his little entrepreneurial business in 1930, lost his car. They had to move from Greensboro to the country and became farmers, where they did not have electricity and running water and inside bathrooms, which they'd had in Greensboro. So they had a culture change, and I kind of grew up hearing a lot about that as a child. And then my two brothers joined the Army in 1942. So my childhood was totally dominated by World War II. And they're being gone for 4 years. And gasoline and automobile tires and sugar and coffee and shoes were all rationed. So the government issued each family so many ration stamps. And you not only had to have money, you had to have a stamp to buy things with. I remember that very vividly of people waiting to have another supply of stamps. And that lasted 4 years. The atomic bomb was a major issue, and I was 10 years old when the bomb was dropped. I read the paper every day. I remember all about the concentration camps in Japan and Germany and how our prisoners of war were being treated. But the bomb produced a lot of hostility and anger. President Truman had only been president for 5 months. He didn't even know we had the bomb when he became president upon the death of President Roosevelt. But he knew about the invasion of Japan by conventional military means, and he decided less people would be killed on both sides and that the war would end immediately if you dropped the bomb. So he approved it, and it was done. And I used to go, when I was in Kansas City at the seminary, to the Truman Library nearly every Saturday morning. And when they pulled up the 1945 invasion of Japan and Japan's plans to fight us in door to door in the whole island, I was convinced that less people died, even those who died later years, with the atomic bomb than would have died had we invaded Japan by conventional military means. The next thing, I went into the ministry in 54, but in 47, 48 through 55, for about 8 years, every family lived in mortal fear of their children contracting polio. All the swimming pools were closed. I didn't have access to one. I lived in the country, but all the city pools were closed. The city parks were closed, and the congregating of people was much like it is now. So that family reunions and trips and many things were curtailed because there was a psychological dread and fear, almost horror, of polio, which was a lifetime disease that you in those days never got over. I remember so well when Dr. Jonas Salk developed the vaccine for polio. And polio dropped from 58,000 cases the year I finished high school to 161 cases 4 years later. Now, 4 years is a long time until you look at it in retrospect. And I don't know how long we're in for now. Then the swine flu epidemic, when President Ford was president, and he called for national inoculation with the vaccine that was developed. The swine flu also came out of China, by the way, H1N1. And my brother took the shot and developed Guillain-Barré. It was later proven that a lot of people who took the vaccine for swine flu developed Guillain-Barré, which was a facial paralysis, really bad disease. I think years later, Andy Griffith had it. I want to talk a little bit, though, as a student of history. Smallpox almost wiped out some Indian tribes when white people came to North America, particularly those that the Spanish came to, like the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayas, and the Western North American tribes in Arizona, California, all the way up the West Coast. Indeed, I did and the half of their population, and it's the Incas lost 90% of theirs. So part of it was a military conquest by the Spanish conquistadors, but part of it was smallpox. They had no knowledge of it, no way to prevent it at all. They didn't know what was happening, really, so they had no way of mitigation. 30% of our North American Native Americans on the West Coast, 30% died with smallpox. Then in 1793, just as we were winning the Revolutionary War, a yellow fever epidemic broke out in Philadelphia, and 10% of the population died. The population of Philadelphia was 50,000. They lost 5,000 by death and 20,000 by exodus. People just left the city, walked out. George Washington was president. He even left the city. And that was a fear that it might go through all the colonies. And we just won our independence, but yellow fever might destroy the population. Cholera, there have been 7 cholera pandemics in recorded history. The most recent one, interestingly enough, was from 1961 to 70. It originated in North Africa. It spread to Italy. It killed 25 million people from 1865 to 1970. 25 million died with cholera. And we still have some cholera breakouts in a few of the African countries. Ethiopia had one rather recently, in recent years. Then the biggest one of all was Spanish flu. We don't think about it when we talk about the casualties that we suffered from fighting World War I. But 62% of the military casualties, American casualties, in World War I were from the flu, not from the battlefield. And I lost 2 aunts. My mother lost 2 sisters by the Spanish flu. It did come out of Spain. It was not considered xenophobia to say that it was Spanish flu, still call that. But we had no vaccine, we had no antibiotics, we had no sulfur drugs, so we had no way of combating it. I didn't even mention the Black Death in the 13th century in Europe. It killed 1/3 of the people of Europe. 1/3 of the people died. In many countries, half died. The little song, Ring Around the Roses, Pocket Full of Posies, Red bird, blue bird will all fall down. That little thing was developed during the Black Death. it was thought that if you wore fresh flowers in your lapel, that the fragrance from the flowers might keep the germ from getting to you. It didn't, but people wore flowers. Some people still wear a rose in their pocket. But the little song was, red bird, blue bird will all fall down, meaning we'll all die. Even the term God bless you. If you had the Black Death, which was really bubonic plague, people would say, God bless you because you'll die. Nothing anybody else can do for you. We've had these pandemics throughout our history. Some of them have been even more devastating than this one is. Many have been less. But we've never had the media coverage. We've never in America had the social lockdown. We've never been forbidden to go to church. We've never been forbidden to assemble, which is one of those two things are in our Bill of Rights, the right of assembly and the right of worship. And there's a little bit of an argument going on now as to whether civil authorities have the right to close churches. But that's kind of beside the point, I suppose. They're closed. I think I did a little article for the local newspaper in Asheboro, which has received quite much publicity, and it's along this line. In 420 before Christ, BCE, a plague in Greece killed 100,000 people. In 242 CE, Common Era, a plague in Rome killed 5,000 a day. In 541, a plague killed 40% of the population of Egypt. In 735, smallpox killed a third of the Japanese. I mentioned the bubonic plague. Mentioned Rose Around the Roses. And in 1855, an Asian flu emanating from Yunnan, Yunnan, China, killed 15 million throughout Asia, 10 million in India. In 1804, a flu originating in Hong Kong killed 10 million in the next 20 years. All of this came from the World Book Encyclopedia, by the way. I didn't make those numbers up. But we tend to be, well, I think we're doing well as an American people, but we do need to know that pandemics of various sorts and descriptions have gone through the world population many times with many different expressions. And many people died, more than are dying now from this. But we made it. We made it as a civilization. We made it as an economy. We made it as a church. We made it as individual families and people with Christian faith and Muslim faith and Jewish faith and so forth. So I'm 85 years old almost, but I have hope that they will be coming back in a few weeks or months. And the Bible says love casts out fear. So I think we need to practice family love, love for God and trust in God, love for our scientific community who are doing 24/7 work to develop a vaccine, and maybe this combination of the malarial, I can't pronounce it, cure and zithromycin is obviously helping a lot of people, and FDA has now proved that. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, I think.
And once we are able to come back together, as Christians and gather together and worship, how do you think this will impact us going forward in terms of, obviously no one knows the answer, but just from your perspective, we know that a lot of churches right now are using a lot of online virtual means and technology to have virtual meetings and online worship and all kinds of things like that. How do you see all of this affecting us as we move forward? Will it help us kind of propel us into some new, more innovative, creative ways of ministry? Will it give people more of a passion and energy to be physically present with one another after such a long time away? Or could it harm the church and maybe further, faster do some of the changes that have been happening in the last couple of decades? What are your thoughts on some of that?
Every day I think a lot about this. The time I'm not with your grandmother, who has comprehension but not communication, so therefore talking with her I can't do now. So I work some manual labor. I've been painting, I've been working in the yard, and I think more about that question than anything else. I don't know. I don't think anyone does. It's going to be different with different people. I know the small church that I served 4 years after I retired, the minister announced up in Rockingham County in a totally rural community that he was going in every Sunday and open the church. And if anyone wanted to go in individually and pray, they could do that. I don't think that's against the law, but they decided, well, if the minister is going and open the church and he's going in to pray, and we can go in and stay a long way from each other and pray if we wish. I don't know that he went in and prayed, but the attendance at that church is about 75, and about 15 or 20 of them are just standing around their family tombstones in the cemetery, several feet apart, and talking. And they are within earshot of each other, and they just need each other's fellowship. They've been in their homes all week. Most of them that are going are older people, and they got cabin fever. And they've said, well, the minister can go to the church and open it up. We at least can go and have some fellowship. That says to me that people really are missing each other, and that the first Sunday the churches are opened, there'll be a big crowd. Now, whether it's like Easter Sunday and the next Sunday is Low Sunday, I don't know. It does worry me, particularly as I remember some young adult families that quit going to church when I was pastor. Not a lot, but I'd go see them, and I'd say, we've been missing you at church. Well, they've said, we've just decided that all the kids come and get on our king-size bed on Sunday morning, and we just talk and chat. We're together more than we've been all week on a relaxed basis. We're in our pajamas, mom and dad and the kids, and then we go out in the yard, we play, and then we go out for lunch, and we really just don't think we'll be back to church. That scares me. And some of that psychology might be playing into some of the families who have always been kind of rush, go, and not had any time during the week, even Sunday, when they really were together and nothing else to do except be with each other. I hope that doesn't happen, but it concerns me some. The churches that are in North Carolina disobeying the law and having drive-in church, I don't know why the governor objects to staying in your cars and listening to the minister from a microphone, but he does. But we have two here in Asheboro, the Church of God and the Central Carolina Community Church, that are doing that. And the call outs are full, I understand. And a lot of people from other churches are going. So it seems that there is a hunger for some kind of live worship. I think all the churches that I know about are having live stream, even those who have very low-tech ability to do anything except just the minister go before a microphone and preach, are still having live stream. So I hope the hungering and thirsting after righteousness that the Beatitude talks about will really come into play. And from what I'm hearing on television, there's a lot of desire. I think the Catholic Church is doing more to put pressure than the Protestant churches are because of the theology of the Mass. But I look for the churches to be open by the 1st of June, but I may be wrong about that. I have no knowledge of it. I'm just guessing.
Well, I mean, one of the questions for me right now is, how we use technology in ministry and church life and worship. And because all of this has happened so quickly,
Right.
we haven't had a whole lot of time to digest and to reflect on, what are we doing and how are things changing? And if you look at the course of history, there's been a lot of different technologies that have been introduced to society and in the life of the church. Whether it's the printing press, and obviously that helped the Reformation quite a bit. And since the centuries after that, many of the ministers and preachers did a lot of writing and books, and were able to spread those, and Bibles were more widespread to more homes. The organ was a piece of technology that has totally changed.
Handel music could not be played in church until the King of England stood up during the Hallelujah Chorus, impulsively. Yeah. And after the king stood up, they said, well, maybe it's okay for church. But the organ was not a church piece of music. You're right.
And so it's still left to be determined, is what we're doing a good thing, or does it have some consequences that we're not aware of that we'll see in the future? That's one of the questions I'm wrestling with right now. Is
I am too.
Church and worship have always been physical bodily gatherings of Christians, and obviously that will always be primary in the future as well. But if we rely too much on virtual technology, is that just adding to church, or is that actually subtracting from church? And that's one of the questions that I'm wrestling with, that I'm not exactly sure how that will pan out.
Well, nobody does. I do think that many churches will continue to live stream for the homebound members, and in some people who just are accustomed to watching television ministries like Charles Stanley or somebody, and that those people will be reached, we hope, through live stream. But, in the catacombs, people gathered in secret. A sermon from Centenary United Methodist Church in Winter a month ago, and he was mentioning something that I knew and hadn't thought of lately. When communism shut down the churches in Cuba in 1960, the Methodist missionaries had to come home, and a lot of Cubans left and came to Florida and other places. What surprised us was that in 1989, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, Castro was still in power, but a lot of things were relaxed in Cuba. And they did once again allow them to gather and worship, and discovered to their amazement that there were more Methodists in 1990 than there had been in 1960.
Wow.
They had grown in their secret house churches and in their totally different way of gathering for worship, more than they had before the Communist Revolution. In a way, that's got nothing to do with us, except to say that I really believe enough in the power of the gospel that there will be it won't be the same again. The mainline churches are in trouble. We have 300,000 churches in North America. A lot of them are supported both financially and in presence primarily by older people. Most of them have divided. The Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Lutheran Church, the United Church of Christ, and the United Methodist Church is on the verge of division. So the mainline churches that used to be kind of the anchor of Protestantism in North America has disintegrated terribly. But there are independent churches that have grown. There is a house church movement here and there. And so Christianity is not going to die. I don't know how it will morph into something slightly different. I don't know how it will affect your ministry, but and it will affect it. But yours might be very well more creative than mine was, might be more challenging than mine was. I grew up in the age of Christendom. The age of Christendom is over. And in the public psyche, in the political world, in the sports world, in public prayers for games, so many things have already changed, and they will continue to. But John Wesley came to have two words that really dominated his theology: trust and confidence. I think those two words we have to hold on to as laity and clergy. Trust God, have confidence in God, really embrace the gospel. As I'm doing a work right now on the Beatitudes. And without a modicum of the Beatitudes, of peacemaking, of mercy, of hungering and thirsting after righteousness, of purity of heart, our society would almost morally and spiritually and ethically disintegrate without some part of the Christian gospel. So we're going to survive. We're going to come back. I think the same thing is true of free enterprise economics. A lot of businesses are going broke. A lot of little restaurants, which are being, I'm really upset because Lowe's is making more money than ever. The pawn shops are open. The liquor stores are open. The hardware stores are open. The paint stores are open. And the restaurants are closed, even though you can get out the window from people who don't even have a glove on. So I do hope if some adjustments are made soon in restaurants and worship. That would be two things. And obviously people who work. Your brother Samuel is still working. And your brother Alex is not in his office. Samuel's going to his plant.
Alex is still working. He's just working from
not
home.
Out of his home. I see. He's not going to his office. Yeah.
But yeah, going back to your point about the time in which we find ourselves, most of your ministry was during the period of Christendom, and I think that the last few decades, a lot has changed in the life of the world and in the church and Christendom, and this kind of cultural Christian society has disintegrated. And yet, I mean, we still have the Holy Spirit, right? Like God is still doing stuff. And so there's always hope in that. And actually there's a lot more freedom and creativity, I think, that churches and pastors have today. And I think one of the things that this pandemic is showing us, is reminding us, is that church is not a building, right? It's not just a building at 11 a.m. on Sunday morning that people come to, and you have Sunday school and then worship and then you go home. I mean, church can happen now any day, any time of the week. And I do think that bodily, physical presence is still at the heart of the practice of Christianity. But we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting. Any final closing thoughts about this from you?
I just happened to see a book lying here that I got a footnote out of the other day. Read this several years ago, Christianity for the Rest of Us. And Diana Butler Bass says that the Methodist church she attended as a child just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, and her father was very active, and she was active in Sunday school and youth work. But she said, as I became an adult, I realized that the Methodist church was the Rotary Club at prayer. And everybody was to be decent and moral, and the four-way test of Rotary was almost equal to a creed. And that church is now closed, by the way. And she talks about Christianity for the rest of us, meaning those who are no longer in the mainline Christian churches, going to Sunday school and worship, as you just described, every Sunday. But she is still a Christian. And I think we are just going to go through, we have gone in my ministry, in my lifetime, and certainly already in yours, a change from what you just described as cultural Christianity, shall we say. And there's no pressure on business people now to go to church. There used to be. If you were going to be successful in a small town, you came to town to establish a new business. Much of my ministry, whether you were a doctor or whether you were a business person or a banker, whomever transferred you to town, I went to see them. And within 6 months, they usually affiliated with some church. I tried to get it to be ours. Was fairly successful with that. But today, that same church probably doesn't have over 3 doctors. We used to have almost every doctor in this that was in the hospital was in First Methodist Church. And no pressure is put on people now when they take a job, a secular job. Hey, we expect you to go to church. That's gone. So, but on the other hand, people who go now probably go for better reasons. And there's probably more Bible study today than there was in my ministry. Sunday school, by the way, is gone. We're not going to get it back. But we do have to have a small group ministry of some kind. And I think that's going to happen. That is happening, and we'll continue to take different kinds of expression. They use a term right now like, what is it, first impressions, first expressions?
Fresh expressions.
Fresh expressions. Yeah. And some of that will happen.
Yeah. Well, we're going to continue the conversation in part 2 about Methodism. You are one of the leading experts on Methodist history and theology, and so yes, you are. And so,
I've written 4 books on it doesn't mean I'm an expert.
But thank you for everyone who's watched this first part, and we hope that you'll join us in part 2. Okay, let me